So this is the quick short tutorial on how to use Adobe Illustrator to print to the GCC X380. The manual for the GCC X380 is on the desktop in the GCC folder on the GCC desktop computer. Highly recommend that you review that as well as the Adobe Illustrator file there, or Adobe Illustrator tutorial that tells you how to do this. But this is just a quick synopsis. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new document. Let's just call it GCC Test 2. And we want to confirm a couple of things. One, the width should be 36 inches. The height should be 24 inches. What that does is that defines a space. That's the size of the workspace in the GCC. The color mode should be set to RGB, and all the other values are fine. And you can hit OK. What that does is that goes ahead and creates a workspace that's the size of the bed in the GCC. And we're going to do something simple. We're just going to create a little key fob type design. And let's go ahead and zoom in. Now you'll notice that the stroke on this is 1 point and the color is black. We're going to change both of those things. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the stroke from 1 point to 0.1 points. What that does is that's going to change this from a raster to a vector, and it will create these lines will then be interpreted by the laser as a cut instead of an engraving. So the vector values are considered cuts. The raster values are considered engravings. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the color of this line. So we go ahead and click the stroke adjustment, and we're going to change it to a straight up red. That's the same red color as the pen, so it's 25500. So we're going to do that for both of these. And we could have done this beforehand, and then we wouldn't have to change these for each individual one. I'm not going to give an entire tutorial on Adobe Illustrator, primarily because I am not an Adobe Illustrator expert. So now we have a color set for these lines, and we have the stroke set to what will be interpreted by the laser cutter, the GCC, as a vector cut versus a raster engraving. The next step is to go ahead and print, and there's a bunch of things that we want to make sure are set up correctly here when we do the print. The first thing is that the media size should be defined by the driver. You'll notice that a lot of times auto rotate gets selected. We want to uncheck that. And even when that's done, sometimes this is a little bit wonky. One of the easiest ways I found to correct this is just select a different printer and then reselect the X380, and that generally makes the workspace come out right. And then if you want to reposition your print to the upper left or to the center, you can make those adjustments inside the window. The other thing that we're going to go to is we're going to go to color management. Inside of color management, you want to make sure that the printer profile is set to color match RGB, and that the rendering is set to absolute colorimetric, and we want to preserve RGB numbers. That way Illustrator won't try and reinterpret the RGB values, and we'll get the absolute RGB values that we set inside of here when we went and picked the colors. And then the last thing you want to do is go to Advanced, go to the Custom button here, and we want to make sure that these top three are selected. Convert all text to outlines, strokes to outlines, and clip complex regions. Generally, I found that only the first one is unselected. The other two generally are selected. But once that's done, we've pretty much completed all of the adjustments that we need to make. None of these other things need to be adjusted in here. Once that's done, we now need to get into the print spooler. That's done by hitting the Setup button and then hitting the Preferences button, and that will take us to the print spooler. This is where you're going to do most of the work. There's a lot of different options here. Again, I would suggest looking at the X380 manual to understand what these options do. For this tutorial, we're going to use the manual color fill, but these other ones all are really neat, and I would highly recommend that you take a look at them. Manual color fill will let us do a vector cut and an engraving on a piece based on the colors that we've set. And that's what we're going to do here. So this window here operates a lot like the color settings inside of Lightburn. If you have a different color that you want to use, so let's say we had something here and we didn't want it to be green, but we wanted it to be sort of a slightly different yellow. We could change those values, add a custom color, select the custom color, and then you would see that it would actually overwrite that whatever color was there before with this yellow. Or we can go back to the green that was there and just pick that back from the color palette. The one we're using though is this red, and you can see it's set to 255.00, so we don't have to make any changes there. The speed and the power and the PPI settings here are set for a cut. So speed of 20, power at 100, and the PPI, which is this value here, set to X, which means instead of there being, let's say, the default of 300 pulses per inch, which is what it defaults to, instead we've set it to X, which is short for max, which means we get a constant beam as opposed to a pulsed beam. And that's going to give us maximum power to be able to cut through the material. These settings will cut through a 1/4 inch piece of white birch with the repeat set to 4. If you leave the repeat at 1, it will not cut through with these settings. Setting the speed lower is going to cause more outgassing from the piece. Again, on a 1/4 inch piece of white birch, it creates a lot of smoke and you see a lot more smoke damage to the piece, but you can play around with this, whatever you feel works best for you. Raster and vector should be checked. Generally, all these other ones you don't need to check. Some of these options are not going to be displayed in the driver on the GCC desktop machine. It doesn't really have anything to do with the driver. It has, we think, something to do with the operating system. So I think that these settings simply aren't available in Windows 7. This is a Windows 10 machine that I'm demonstrating this to you on, which is why they're showing up. The Advanced tab, again, has a whole bunch of really neat stuff in it. In particular, this Smart Center feature, which is pretty cool. But there too, you want to look at the manual to really understand how all of those work. For this simple tutorial, we're not going to go through any of that stuff. The paper setting you should not need to change. There's nothing that you should need to change in the language. Primarily, again, for a simple cut, you're going to come in here, select manual color fill, and then adjust your power settings under the pen. Once that's all done and everything is set the way that you want it to, you click OK, you click Print, and then you click Print again. And what that does is that will actually send it to the printer. And that's it.